Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one-stop shop for all things Commanders. It's an opposition Wednesday. Cowboys are coming to town, so to get a little closer to the action, we brought on Kyle Youmans, the host of Talking Cowboys. Kyle, how you been, man?
I'm good, man. I feel like it's been too long since the Cowboys and Commanders have gotten after it, and this one's a little bit different than the last couple times that I think these two teams have come together and gotten to play each other.
It's not common for the Cowboys to be looking up from the bottom of the division. What is the state of the franchise as it currently sits?
Yeah, it's been rough. It has been rough here in Dallas, and I'm currently in the team facility, and it's just one of those seasons that feels lost for Dallas. They enter at 3-7. They've of course had the injuries that have stockpiled over the last couple of weeks, especially with Dak Prescott out for the year. Multiple impact players missing time. Micah Parsons just returning 2 weeks ago against Philadelphia after missing multiple games due to a high ankle sprain. You've got offensive linemen banged up. You're missing really your entire depth chart at edge rusher, except for Micah Parsons. And even though there's some hope that some of these guys could return and you have the reinforcements on the way due to injury, at this point you're 4 games under 500 and you're 5 games out of the divisional race. So it may be a little too late for Dallas. I think there's some confidence that they can end the season strong, but with the expectations that entered the year, hoping to win the division for a second straight year, hoping to make a run in the playoffs and paying your guys like Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb significant contract money in order to try and tie them up for the future. All of those expectations have been tempered severely because of what this season has been, how the play was even prior to injury, and then, of course, the injuries that have compounded since then.
Quasi news since the podcast started, I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
The Sanders will be doing the East-West Shrine Bowl, which I think most people think it's like the cousin to the Senior Bowl. Maybe the Senior Bowl is a bit more illustrious. I don't know if that's fair or not, but choosing the venue that will be with the Cowboys certainly isn't going to quash any of the Sanders families to Dallas talk. Is it coincidence? Is it unrealistic? Like, where do you think the franchise is heading now?
Yeah, I think it's unrealistic. First off, I mean, the front office has been very clear. They're not moving on from Mike McCarthy anytime soon, at least this season. That's the case. Now, I think they will reevaluate because his contract's up at the end of this year. So there's a natural reevaluation that's going to take place between now and the end of the year, just based off of how he does perform this season. But when it comes to Deion to Dallas and Michael Irvin making some talks, I think Deion knows very well exactly what he would get himself into. Even if you draft Shadur Sanders, you have a $60 million quarterback in Dak Prescott. I don't think you're going to ask Deion to come in and start his kid or bench his kid one way or the other in this quarterback situation. So I think it's unrealistic. It's fun to talk about, sure, because he's had some success. He has Colorado rocking again. He's got them inside the top 20, 2 of the maybe top 5 best players in the upcoming NFL draft, and Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter on the board. But when it comes to Dallas and Deion, of course, they're going to be tied together no matter what. But I just think it's an unrealistic thought process. And it would be fun to entertain, but nothing more than that.
And organizations have shown that they're willing to take hits. I mean, I'm thinking about like the Falcons and Matt Ryan and maybe Russell with Denver, where teams would say, you know what, it's time to hit the reset button. We don't care. It's a huge hit for Dak, right? I mean, it feels untenable to actually do. You don't think that's what anybody's thinking in Dallas right now?
Not at all. He's just as much of a part of this organization now as he was when he inked the deal earlier this offseason. So, yeah, it is unfortunate, the injury circumstance that it kind of surrounded. Of course, back in 2020, he was going into his contract year, and they had just signed him to a $40 million deal, and he gets injured that offseason, and it makes for an interesting comeback story there. But This year, it's more so unfortunate. He's still the starting quarterback in Dallas. They're not going to move on from Dak anytime soon, and he's going to ride out this contract as is. So, yeah, Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, I know those are two very specific instances in which big contracts were ended early. This is 1 year in. The dead cap money
It's
would
crazy.
be unbelievable. It would be astronomical if they were to do anything of the sort. It would just absolutely wreck the entire salary cap for the Cowboys. They're not going to do that, and I don't think they want to do that. I don't think they want to move on from Dak, even with the injury news. They still believe he's the guy that can get them there.
We had a conversation about this with Derek Clausen on the in the offseason about the quarterbacks that kind of were in line to get signed next. We started with Tua, and it was interesting. Like, Tua fit what they do in Miami so well that I understand why they paid him. I'm not sure teams would have stood in line to give Tua a large contract. Dak, on the other hand, I think is wildly underappreciated. I think if he hit the open market and people could just choose, there would be a line of people that would like to sign Dak Prescott. It feels like he doesn't get enough respect in the league.
No, and I think you're spot on. I think his versatility as a quarterback, he's done so with multiple play callers. He did so in the Jason Garrett era. He did so under Mike McCarthy and Kellen Moore, once Kellen Moore became the offensive coordinator in Dallas. And now he's had success and was the number 2 in the MVP voting last year as Mike McCarthy took over the play calling for his first season. So, yeah, I think the versatility, whether it's the system or the player or his arm strength or whatever it may be, leadership ability is also very, very high. He's beloved in this locker room, win or lose. I mean, people love Dak. And that's a part of the game that is underutilized because you better win games, you better make playoff runs. And I mean, fact of the matter is he's won games in the regular season, but you haven't in the playoffs. And so that's where the scrutiny and the criticism comes from for Dak Prescott. But compared to the rest of the league, it's hard to win playoff games. I mean, he's been in an era of crossover between Tom Brady and Peyton and Patrick Mahomes. Sure. And so you've had the crossover of one dominant force and another dominant force and an NFC that's just had to go up against it all the way through. So it's tough that I think he hasn't had the notoriety from across the country, but I think the respect is there from a league standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, to where they know he's the guy moving forward. And I think if he were to test the open market, the number would be even more astronomical than it is right now, because like you said, teams would be lining up to try and sign a guy like that.
I agree with what you said, and I think from a league standpoint and from inside that building, I'm sure that's correct. Can you say the same things that way about Mike McCarthy?
Maybe not as much. I think the scrutiny, it certainly lies on him as well whenever it comes to the way that this team was playing prior to decimation due to injury, because this team wasn't playing well going into the Atlanta game. They were already reeling. They were already going up against a first-place schedule. And though he entered the year with a roster that I think all of us looked at and said, this is a roster capable of playing well and winning the division. You've got all pros at every level on offense, offensive line. You've got a quarterback, you've got a wide receiver, you've got a tight end that you feel really good about, maybe not an all pro, but still a really high caliber tight end. Running back was one big question mark, and that hasn't been answered even without injury. Then you flip to the defensive side, which of course isn't necessarily Mike McCarthy's area, but he did hire the guy that is supposed to revamp your defense following the departure of Dan Quinn and the success that he had here that has ultimately led him to Washington. You were trying to replicate some of that at the end of the day with Mike Zimmer, and it hasn't happened. I mean, they've given up 30-plus points 5 times this year. Dan Quinn never had a season or a regular season where he allowed more than 30 points per game in 3 games. So 5 this year already, and we're only 10 games in. Half of the time they're giving up 30 points per game, on pace for 8 or 9 by the end of the season, whereas Dan Quinn never had more than 3. So, yeah, I think that's where the scrutiny is going to come from, is the fact that they weren't playing well prior to injury. They didn't take advantage of the roster that was given in front of them, even though there might have been a lack of depth on that roster. And the hire that he made to try and shore up your defense following the departure of a high-quality defensive coordinator, it never really worked out, and it didn't work out for the Cowboys this time around.
defense started off slowly for the Commanders this year, and I think the fan base was kind of surprised. They thought maybe it would be the other way around, right? That the defense would allow the offense to slowly come along. And
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. Joe Witt Jr. said in a press conference a couple weeks ago, he said, "We found the problem to be that I thought I just kept feeling like it was year 3 of a Cowboys install,
Mm,
and it wasn't. It's year 1 of a Commanders install."
yeah.
I'm curious how much the Cowboys have missed Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr.
Significantly. I mean, both of those guys are one, they're first class people. That's the
Yes.
thing. I mean, Dan Quinn was a player coach, and he was a guy that was so respected within the media, respected within the community. I used to do some of the salute to service events with him, and the way that he welcomes in the military with open arms and those who have served our nation, veterans, and so on and so forth. It's incredible. And I think he's in a perfect spot. When the Washington job opened last year, that was where I kind of circled and said that would be a great spot for Dan Quinn. They're going to have a high draft pick. They're going to have some pieces on defense that have some success. It may not be an instant turnaround, and I didn't expect a 7-2 start. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I thought that was overachieving on expectation, but I thought he would have success in Washington even before he did end up taking the job and ended up being offered the job in the first place. So the fact that he left was not surprising. If anything, it was surprising that he stuck around for 3 years the way that he turned around the Cowboys defense from 2020 to 2021. And I think he masked some of the problems that they have just by being a good X's and O's football coach. They have significant problems that revert back to what they dealt with in 2020. That was my first year covering the team on an on-air side of things. So, I mean, I remember talking about run defense and lack of discipline and injuries providing for lack of depth and guys next man up mentality not really working out in their favor. It's all the same thing. They're giving up the big play. They're giving up big runs. They're allowing for receivers out of the backfield to have success, whether it's Nico Collins on a screen that goes 77 yards and luckily gets called back on the opening play from scrimmage on Monday Night Football, or it's Joe Mixon out of the backfield for the Houston Texans having 100 scrimmage yards by the 11-minute mark in the second quarter. They've allowed for that success to happen defensively. And so I think, yeah, they're absolutely missed, and they're good football coaches. So they thought they hired a guy in Mike Zimmer that could maybe mask some of those problems just like Dan Quinn did, and it hasn't worked out the same way, whether it be because of injury or lack of pressure or lack of turnovers, which were predicated heavily in the Dan Quinn system. All of those things just haven't been there for the Cowboys this year.
As a side note, you mentioned Monday Night Football. I was facing my wife in the family fantasy league. I had CeeDee Lamb, and she had the Houston defense.
Yeah.
And because of Guyton, I think they ended up with like 30 fantasy points on their defense, and I lost.
Wow.
So, really appreciated that from the offense there.
Yeah.
They spent a 4th-round pick on the quarterback. What can you tell us as to why he's not? I mean, this feels like the perfect time when you want to get a guy like Trey Lance in and get work. You kind of already know what you have in Cooper Rush. You've seen this show before. He's good enough to be in spot duty, but I think you'd be trying to figure out what it is that you got in Trey Lance. No.
Yeah, I think there's elements to that, and both guys are going into a contract year, so I think.
Or has he just been terrible?
The preseason was not good for Trey Lance. Let's put it that way. So I think even the small sample size that you do have with Trey, it wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, and I don't think, if I'm being completely honest, I don't think he's earned the right to be the starting quarterback for the team yet. Whereas when Cooper Rush was the starter 2 years ago, in the absence of Dak Prescott, he was 4-1 that year. He was 1-0 the year prior to that. He had filled in very nicely for Dak in the past. Came into this year 5-1 as a starter with the Cowboys. So I think he earned the right, whereas Trey Lance never really looked good in the 3 games he was given in the preseason to try and get it. Now, like I said, it's a very small sample size, and I agree with you in this point moving forward at 3-7, especially if you lose this week to Washington and you're 3-8, it's evaluation time. However, because of what we talked about earlier with Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer and this coaching staff all being placed on a 1-year deal essentially prior to the season starting, they said, we're not going to fire anybody. We're going to bring you guys back, and we're going to let you get after it, but your contract's up at the end of the year. We're not going to renew you yet. We want to see how this goes. So with it being a one-year deal on a lot of areas of this coaching staff, they're not going to give a guy an opportunity if he doesn't give the best chance to win football games. They're not in the business of tanking. Jerry Jones doesn't want to be in the business of tanking. So this organization has no intentions of throwing in the towel and laying down, despite how bad it has been throughout the 2024 campaign. So if you're thinking you're going to see it just for the sake of it, you're probably not going to. If it does come down to it and they believe wholeheartedly in the locker room and the coaching meetings that Trey Lance gives themselves the best opportunity to win, that's when you'll see Trey Lance, and I don't think they feel that way.
There may be nothing worse in all of professional sports than being a lame duck coach on a 1 year. Are you surprised? I mean, I understand the concept, right? You get Dak out there, you get to rocking and rolling again, and everything goes right, and contract extension on the way. Mm-hmm. Those 1 year deals, as you know, Kyle, are tough to get by. It's easy to lose the locker room that way. Where you surprise. This 2-part question. You've seen locker rooms that have been lost before. Mm-hmm. Is it there? Are we getting there? And were you surprised if they were going to keep him for a year that they didn't at least give him a 1 year extension so he wasn't on this 1 year lame duck deal?
No, I'm not surprised at the lack of an extension. I don't believe they've lost the locker room either. You said, have they lost it? Are they not losing it? Or are they getting there? I think there's a middle ground there. I think they're getting there. And 5 straight losses, the way that you've lost those games will all certainly lead to things like that. So I think they're getting there, but they haven't been there yet. And I think there's still a chance for this team to turn things around from a mentality standpoint, maybe not a season or a playoff push, but you're playing for yourself. You're playing for the guys around you and your tape and your future and your ability to be picked up either by the Cowboys next year or a roster next year. And it's the same for this coaching staff. So there's still a lot of pride, I think, in that locker room, whether they believe the season is a wash or not. They're still going to play very hard, and you're going to see their effort day in, day out. I don't believe they've lost the locker room despite some of the media reports and where they've had it. Because like you said, I've seen locker rooms that have been lost before. This is not one of them, despite how bad the losses have been. It's been more frustration than fallout.
And you can tell the difference for sure. There's no doubt about that. Dante Fowler is number 3 in the league in sacks. He looks like the kid that came out of Florida. Has that surprised you? It certainly has surprised me.
Yeah, it may be not surprising because he showed flashes of that during his time in Dallas, but he was behind guys like Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. I think you had 2 of the top edge rushers in football at what they do. Micah's a top 5 perennial defensive player of the year candidate. DeMarcus Lawrence is one of the best run defenders off of the edge in football right now. So the fact that he was kind of stashed on the roster, he and Dorrance Armstrong going to Washington, that was a significant loss for the Cowboys in their own right. That's why they spent a 2nd-round pick on Marshawn Nealon out of Western Michigan, because they were trying to replace what Dante Fowler Jr. and Dorrance Armstrong did. But they're Dan Quinn guys. And so the fact that he's not stashed on a roster, he's able to get starter snaps, I'm not shocked that he's had the success that he's had. And honestly, Dante was great here with us. He was great with the Cowboys. He's going to continue to be great. And Dan Quinn's a big reason for that. He knows how to utilize him pretty well.
Some of the guys you mentioned that came from Dallas to Washington, one that's been a really big surprise to me, at least, is Biotis the center. They live in shotgun and pistol, and for them to have had, I think, 2 bobbled snaps the entire season, to me is incredible. Did you see this for him? Is this another guy that just kind of was lost in the sauce? Because he's been really good here.
Yeah, I think he was undervalued here. I thought he was always better than his tape indicated. His tape wasn't perfect here. It wasn't significantly ahead of the pack. And it wasn't really fair, especially the last couple years, because he had an all-pro caliber left guard in Tyler Smith, who's having a great year this year again. And then he's had one of the best guards in football to his right-hand side in Zach Martin. So he kind of, when there was a lapse up front, especially out of the interior, he was the one that got a lot of the blame. I don't know if that was necessarily fair. I think it was a young guy in Tyler Smith that is going to give up some pressures. And I think Zach Martin was on the back end of his career, and he's going to give up some pressures as well. And a lot of times Biadasz ate the blame for that. And so, yeah, I think it was time for him to get a change of scenery. I think that was going to benefit him, whether it was Washington or not. And then once he landed in Washington with the quarterback that he has, and Jaden Daniels too, now that he can kind of rely on behind him and it can buy time, whether or not you give up a pressure or not, he's going to be in a good spot to be successful. And he hasn't really given up pressures. I think I saw the other day he's given up 1 sack and 8 pressures in the 10 games or the 11 games so far. So, yeah, I think Biadasz in a change of scenery was needed, and he's taken full advantage of it.
Yeah, he's been really good. You guys drafted a couple of defensive players this year that I'm really high on. I'm curious to hear your take on how they've done so far. Overshawn from Texas, I thought had a real chance to be the real deal. And then Maisie Smith was either this year or last year, but I'm real high on that guy. How have they been doing so far?
Yeah, both of those guys were a part of the 2023 draft class, and Maisie Smith specifically hasn't lived up to the expectation of a first-round pick. If he was a 4th or a 5th-round pick, I think you'd be okay with the production you've gotten from Maisie. He hasn't been great. There's been lapses, but there's also been flashes in the middle of the defensive line. Had a great game earlier in the year inside the division against the New York Giants. However, you can't just have flashes as a first-round pick, and you can't be in the bottom half of the league in your position if you're a first-round pick. So the expectations have not been met. Whereas DeMarvion Overshown, it took him a little bit because he was hurt last preseason, out for the entire year last year. So this is essentially his rookie year. He's been fantastic. Maybe one of the best players on defense as a whole. I mean, it's been him and Micah Parsons as the real impact players in a year where you're missing some key pieces on your defensive line and in your front seven. DeMarvion Overshown has been a bright spot. So both of those guys from the same draft class have kind of gone different directions. And Overshown was a pet cat of mine out of Texas. I thought he was going to be a great Dan Quinn guy. Was excited to see him in that system last year with the length and the speed and the acceleration. I mean, he has the same 10-yard split as Micah Parsons did at the combine. I mean, they have legitimate and elite speed. And I was excited to see it last year with DQ. Didn't get it because of the injury. He's gotten to unleash it a little bit this year under Mike Zimmer, but still a great player and a prospect the Cowboys are excited about.
Now, as Commanders fans, we've been in the position where you guys are now. What do you kind of look for the rest of the season? You know, it's not obviously the quarterback's on IR, he's not coming back. So it's like, when you start, when the coaching staff start saying, hey, this is what we've got to do to continue, moving forward throughout the year, what does that look like, do you think?
You got to have small wins. You got to find the small things to look forward to, whether it's your youth, getting some guys reps and them looking solid. There haven't been a whole lot of small wins this year. Pretty much anywhere you look, it's been under expectation. So you're trying to meet the initial expectation or just see growth in areas. And I think right now it's been the toughest season that I've had covering the team because they've won 12 games in each of the last 3 years. And even in the COVID season of 2020, kind of had the built-in excuse that Dak was out. You had the COVID-19 pandemic, and that threw a wrench into everything in its own right, regardless of how you were playing. So this year's been tough because you don't necessarily have the built-in excuse. And you also don't have the draft capital. You don't have the salary cap room to look to the future and say, wow, they're going to be way better in the future because they're going to do this, 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 and this. You don't really know what direction you're headed. You don't know who your head coach is going to be next year. You don't know who your key players outside of the cornerstone guys like Dak and CD and Trayvon Diggs are going to be. So it's a tough season to be around. And I think right now the biggest thing for me is seeing small victories from this team week in and week out. Take it game by game. I know that's cliche, but that's the way you got to look at it. Because if you think you're going to rattle off 8 straight wins and somehow have Washington and Philly stumble along the way and win the division, because you're probably not going to be a wild card at 7 losses, 10-7. You're probably not going to win the wild card spot in that regard. You could possibly, but it's far fetched. I think it's like a 0.8% that they make the playoffs at a 3-7 record. So yeah, it's tough going right now for the Cowboys, but you got to find small things to look forward to.
I usually wrap these shows up by saying, Kyle, if Dan Quinn came to you and said, what's the key to beating the Cowboys? We'll change that up a little bit. The point spread's 10.5. So I guess the question would be, what would you say the key to the upset would be then?
Getting off to a hot start. It's just like any other upset in football, right? If you got an underdog, a severe underdog, you get a couple drives going your way, you put points on the board early. Usually underdogs don't come back. They don't come from behind to beat the better team, to beat the favorites. It's rare that happens at no matter what level of football that we're talking about. So Dan Quinn, while he was here with Dallas, and it's been the same in Washington, was predicated off of having a hot start and a lead, because they weren't going to allow a team to come back, because they would pin their ears back on defense and they would get home. That's what Dallas has to avoid, because as soon as they're down 7 points, 10 points, 17 points, whatever it ends up being, there's no hope at that point moving forward. So if you're Dallas, you got to score on your opening offensive drive, whether that's the first drive of the game or the second drive after you get Washington's results on their offensive drive. You have to score on your opening drive of the game. And honestly, I would probably say the first 2. You got to get in the end zone, at least one of those 2, put up 10 points early, and give yourself a shot. That's what you got to have from the Cowboys if you even stand a chance on the road against Washington.
You flying out for the game this week?
So we do our pre and post here. So I've got our pregame and postgame coverage from the Star in Frisco. So we have hour-long pregame shows starting at 11 a.m. Central Time. You can watch that online if you want. We do talk Commanders, I promise. Cowboys and Commanders. We're Cowboys heavy, but we talk a lot of Commanders, and we will, especially with Dan Quinn this week. And then we've got post-game coverage starting right after the game. 3 different post-game shows that we film from our studio here at the Star. So not making the trip out there, but I will be watching very intently and giving as much analysis as we can.
All right, buddy. I appreciate you. These are always great.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. Appreciate you having me.
All right, man.